Hello and welcome everyone to the Food Dialogues 2020. My name is Kurt Ackerman. Thank you for joining us. I'm with the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust, and we are so pleased to be hosting these events once again. This is the third of 5 moderated panel discussions we're having this week, and our focus is on food and health, today's topic. Just a note to everyone in attendance that this is being recorded, so just please bear that in mind. I'm just going to make a few brief introductory comments before we get into the substance of our event today. But I think the spirit of this needs to be shared in that we are really encouraging dialogue. You won't hear people standing up and pontificating, even virtually standing up, but rather engaging with one another, and we encourage you who are in attendance to please also engage in the dialogue and to use the Q&A function in Zoom to raise any questions or topics that you would like our speakers or panelists to address. The chat we can all use to discuss or comment, but if there's something that you would like to raise for the speakers, please use the Q&A function and we'll keep an eye on that. I would also like to just briefly acknowledge and thank our sponsors, the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security and the DG Murray Trust, and our partners, the African Center for Cities, Aribi Village, the City of Cape Town, ICLEI, and Derek. We kicked this year's Food Dialogues off with an overview presentation on Cape Town's food system from Professor Jane Battersby on the 20th of July, and then we've released 23 talks the week of 27th to the 31st of July, all of which are available for replay on the Food Dialogues platform, which you've all found, but it's at capetown.fooddialogues.info. So as mentioned, today's theme is food and health, and the discussion will be moderated by Yolanda Busbee Methvin. She's the founder of the Prosperity Food Company and the host of the Be There, Do That podcast. And without any further ado, I will hand over to Yolanda.
Hello, everybody. I hope that you had a really nice and fulfilling, nutritious lunch. And I just want to say, yeah, I'm really excited to be chatting amongst you women and of such knowledge and exposure and community concern. I love the concept of nutrition as the bedrock and underpinning of any kind of a community-based initiative around public health. And I think that you each are perfectly poised to talk us through the variety of nodes that this COVID-19 pandemic has brought to our awareness. Having watched each of your singular presentations, which are, as Kurt just said, readily available on the website as well as on YouTube, I learned quite a bit about you each, but also about a particular theme that seems to be running through our overall concerns about the health and wellness of our food system. And that theme for me turned out to really be about education and whose responsibility it is to educate the consumer about the nutritional availability of the food that is within the system, whether one is buying from an informal environment or more formalized grocery stores. It seems that at essence, our concern really, really circles around consumer education. So what I wanted to do was ask you each to introduce yourselves, and then I want to ask just a very generic question, which we often ask each other throughout the day. What did you have for breakfast today, Thandi? And did it leave you feeling nutritionally fulfilled?
Hi, I'm Thandi Puoane. Yes, today I had oats and milk and goji berries. Yes, and then an apple after that, and I was fulfilled. I enjoyed my breakfast. And then I had coffee with milk.
What is it that made you feel a sense of fulfillment in that breakfast?
Oats. Oats is filling for me, yeah. And then from there to add a little bit of a fruit was really food. It made me full, yeah. It's filling, yeah. And then just to add something to drink after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the food goes down.
Sounds like it's the actual availability of the nutritional diversity. And I think that's something similar to what you talked about, Beatrice, in your presentation, which would probably also have informed what you had for breakfast. How about you? I just cannot wait to hear what you have to say, but I'm missing parts of it because you've got your mute
Oh,
on.
sorry, yeah. Okay, so I'm a nutritional therapist, educationalist, consultant, and yes, I am very involved with creating a diet which is nutritionally dense and nutritionally various. So let me talk to you what I had for breakfast. So I sauteed up some onions, mushrooms, peppers, a couple other things as well. I can't even think about them, but so about 5 or 6 vegetables. Had some garlic in there, some turmeric, cinnamon, ginger, which are paste, and then I put in some scrambled eggs right at the end. I always have some pickled vegetables in my fridge, which is usually some kind of carrots, beetroot, turnips, radishes, fennel, any kind of crisp vegetables, which I simmer in some apple cider vinegar with some spices and herbs. I had some sauerkraut, and I had some pesto, which I make out of the wild greens in my garden, which contains about 6 or 7 different kinds of greens, including garlic and ginger, and garlic and cinnamon and turmeric, and some tahini. I think that was, and I had some avocado. That was my breakfast, and then I had a cacao.
Wow, that's
So
quite,
yeah,
that's quite diverse.
I absolutely think that we need to have some good quality protein, because during the night we have been healing, detoxing, growing tissue, and doing all those things, and we really need to replace everything in the morning. So you need to have your good quality protein. So obviously that can be eggs or whatever, meat or whatever you want to do, whatever. And then some good quality, lots of fiber, different fibers in vegetables, mainly vegetables, a little bit of fruit, and then some good quality fat, avocado, coconut oil, or butter or olive oil, or whatever you choose. So yeah, I was absolutely, and that's me done until supper time.
Wow. Now, Beatrice, I think that with your diverse palate, you probably didn't leave very much left for Lisanne. Lisanne, what did you have for breakfast?
I can just say wow to that. So, Yolanda, I've been rekindling my baking and cooking skills during lockdown. I really enjoyed Jane Battersby's first and second talk, where she spoke about how we want to actually engage with our food when we, in times of desperation, and when we feel like we do during this lockdown. And I have experienced the same. So I had homemade muesli this morning, which I made from whole rolled oats and local honey and some cinnamon and a dash of vanilla and 3-seed oil that I roasted, and then I added some nuts and seeds and dried fruit, and I had that with skim milk and coffee.
Okay, I must say I'm so impressed not only with the grazing variety that you ladies have had in one meal in the day, but also with the way that you look. You look so healthy, you look so vibrant, each of you, and it must be as it relates to nutritional density. But just in case there are those of us who have no idea what that means, Lisanne, can you tell us a little bit about nutritional density and where what you are doing professionally and from a passion plays into that?
Right. So when we speak about nutritional density or variety, we mean that you need various different foods in your diet to supply you with the nutritional needs that you require for various different stages of your life. So, of course, my passion and area of experience and expertise lies with maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. And the very first taste of a diverse diet comes from the mother who ingests food during pregnancy, and the baby then assimilates those nutrients, and they can also assimilate already some of the culture that comes with it, and that continues into breastfeeding, when certain tastes of food is also found in breast milk. So a child can actually be accustomed to the diet that a mother is currently eating during the time of pregnancy and breastfeeding when they are still very small. And as we transition our children from exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life, and we start with solid foods at 6 months and continue with breastfeeding, we encourage mothers to provide a variety of different foods, because different foods and food groups give us different nutrients. So if we only eat one kind of food, we are depleting and depriving ourselves from other nutrients that we need. So if we speak about different foods, we speak about proteins, which we find in animal sources like meat and eggs and fish and milk, and then also fruit, vegetables, starches, and fats. And I think from the different speakers and just their breakfast, you already heard so many of those different foods that should be included in a healthy, varied diet. And we encourage mothers to give real food, not food that are remnants of food, that have been so diluted by the way that they've been produced and then also refined, but that they give real food that you can still recognize in its original form, that we provide that to our children and of course to our adults also.
Mm. And Thandi, I would imagine for you as a professor, you sit with kids who are spacing out, dazed out, snacking on crisps in class. What do you experience from a nutritional educator perspective about the human who's sitting in front of you? Are they demonstrating vitality, nutritional density? Do they have an awareness? Is it just intellectualized for them at that point? Those are we talking about now, which are teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers definitely have poor choices, you know. They want to go for a shortcut, they want to snack, and some of them, because of lack of knowledge, they think they're dieting, they won't eat real food, but unfortunately you see them having chocolate, chips, and Coke, certain drinks. And you just wonder how are they managing? How are they managing? Because they would skip breakfast, most of them, and then lunchtime they pick up that. Even if there are fruits available on campus that are cheaper than what they usually buy, but they will go for the easy options, which are poor options, not healthy options. So there's definitely lack of knowledge amongst the teenagers, among the university students, and yeah, that puts them make them end up making poor choices about the food.
So whose responsibility is it to teach these young people, Thandi? Should they know this coming in? And particularly if they're taking courses from you, you would assume this is an area of interest. Where's the miss? What's happening?
I think we need to start at an early age, primary school. That's where we need to start educating the kids about, including the parents, of course, the families, as well as the children at the primary level, so that they know how to make healthy choices. Encourage them to eat healthy, consumption of fruits and vegetables when they grow up. And the parents also encourage them to prepare lunch that is healthy lunch. And the teachers also involved. So it involves the parent, it involves the school, it involves the teachers themselves, the curriculum. Encourage them, because if you start very late in life, it's too late. People are, teenagers, they sort of rebel. So they will just go and eat whatever they want anyway. So I think the families should be involved, the parents should be involved. At the same time, what I've seen from our work is that at times the parents, they prepare healthy lunch. Kids take it to school. they share with the others, they trade for the unhealthy lunch. Or when they leave school, after school, they pass by the tuck shop and they buy unhealthy snack. So it's difficult. But if we start at an early age within the families, start before pregnancy. During lactation, the parents eat healthy and they transfer that knowledge to the children at home. Although children, when they go out, they will have their own choices, but at least they have the basics.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the arc, yeah, because if I go back to this thematic that I picked up from your presentations, then it sort of follows on with something that Lisanne said, which is actually about taking a whole society approach. And if we look at this individual woman and this gestating infant, and we talk about pre-birth feeding, then we move through to the school age, adolescent, young adult, and their errant eating. We find ourselves engaging at the level of procreation with hormonal upsets. And Beatrice, I think this is something that you touched on also in your speech, which is about how all this nutritional density enhances us to be best performing. And I would imagine that's not just for women and our hormones, it's for everyone. How does that feature, Beatrice?
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And in fact, the thing about the hormonal system is actually, just in the last couple of years, it's actually been called, or the menstrual cycle, which is a reflection, obviously, of the women's hormones. Although, of course, men don't have quite the same feedback as women do, but nevertheless, it is appropriate to think about that. Is that actually when one is in, the more nutritionally dense your food is and healthy your lifestyle and food is, the more likely that your reproductive system is going to be optimal. And because I work with a lot of young women with hormonal issues, it's definitely like sort of the hormonal system gets put on the back burner because it's not vital to your life for today. So, and I think a lot of young women, if they're not thinking about getting pregnant, for example, actually don't realize how important their menstrual cycle, an optimal menstrual cycle is. And in fact, I've had some clients whose medical practitioners have said to them because they're not menstruating, they said, "Oh, lucky you." And because I mean, absolutely, if you're not having your period, then you're not ovulating, and if you're not ovulating, then your body is actually saying this is not a safe space to have a baby. And I know that a lot of women think, oh well, I don't want to have a baby right now, so it doesn't matter. But actually, it's so critical. And then when they do want to have a baby, and I mean, we can see it all over South Africa, how many people, I was at the fertility show in Johannesburg just before lockdown, and there were thousands of people there wanting desperately to get pregnant. And instead of optimizing their diet and their lifestyle before they actually decide to get pregnant, they go straight, if they're not pregnant within a few months, they go straight for the IVF, which is just a disaster. But I just wanted to add something that in the last 50 years, the sperm count has gone down by 50% worldwide. And if one sperm count has gone down by 70%, then that species is on the shortlist for decimation. I mean, that's scary. And you think about men make millions and millions of sperm. Women only have one egg a month, but men have millions. But actually, only something like, on the whole, the criteria are that they only need 5% good quality sperm to be able to get pregnant. Only 5%. But actually, the evidence shows that you need at least 14 to 20% to have optimal chances of getting pregnant. So I think, that's a critical issue for me, the hormonal thing. And I think it's getting bigger and bigger. And unfortunately, I think birth control, pharmaceutical birth control is playing a huge role in the devastation of women's health.
I can see and feel, Lisanne, that's pushed a couple buttons for you again in terms of looking at the gestational period of health and an optimal nutrition. What comes up for you with that?
Yes, so I can't agree more. I think we need to really think very hard and deep about what we are putting into our mouths, because there are so many sayings about food, and one is you are what you eat. And I think if people just knew how true that was, they would really consider every bite they take, and especially the bites they take from takeouts and takeaway stores. So, I mean, when your nutrients that you put into your system gets, I'll just say it, like dissolved and absorbed into your bloodstream and then into the cells, that is actually becoming you. So when I speak to teenagers, you spoke to Thandi just now about our teenagers, it's often a good way to explain to them how this works, that the food becomes part of them. And you cannot expect to perform optimally if you are not ingesting the right nutrition and the right fuel. So your body is very kind to you for a certain number of years, and the body is resilient and can withstand quite a few knocks. But what we are seeing is that we are seeing earlier and earlier in the life cycle that children are battling with different diseases that we expect only later in life. So we expect maybe a heart condition or diabetes later in life. You don't expect that in a teenager. I'm now speaking non-insulin dependent diabetes, where you actually deplete the one organ called the pancreas. We don't expect that in teenage years already, but that is what we are now seeing. And that is directly lifestyle related, because that pancreas is so tired of producing insulin all the time to manage what you are putting into your body, that it at one moment in time will just say, I've had enough, I can't deal with this. So we can't stress the point that all the other speakers have made about starting early, and specifically if you think about nutrition and nutrition during pregnancy, even pre-pregnancy, how important that is to prepare the body to nurture a new human being. People think I'll stop smoking just before I fall pregnant, or I'll stop drinking and the husband continues smoking and the husband continues drinking, or whatever other lifestyle issues that are not so healthy. And it's more complex than that. You need to consider your reproductive health, like Beatrice has said, sorry. And also the males, they can't just carry on and think they don't contribute to this because the mother carries the baby. They do contribute genetic material. And I mean that you have to be healthy to produce a healthy offspring.
I feel like, you know, of course we are speaking within a very particular cultural context also. And that cultural context is held and shaped by traditional wisdom and information systems, by patriarchal systems and information, so that it often is not even a discussion between the male and the female about what makes the best nutritional uptake for the family, right? So if we just say stereotypically, it's a male who says, no, I want chops and what is it, vlees and you know, let's just move on like that. Someone else says, well, we need to have a little bit of greens, and they say, okay, and they push it alongside to the left of the plate. And I think, again, in looking at this as a cultural phenomenon in the face of COVID-19, where you even have lessening accessibility to dense varieties of nutritional uptake, where again, this begs the question, who's responsible for inputting this knowledge on a community level so that we can be resilient as a culture to these sorts of stresses that come along, like these global pandemics, so that people say, okay, well, that means I won't have chops this week because it's expensive. It's also not very healthy for me, but now I'm going to double down on the spinach. No one's going to just say, okay, well, I'll just now only have potatoes and upload the sugar. So Thandi, again, how do you guys put that within your educational content and decide and discover who's responsible for transferring that information?
I mean, health workers, people who are working with communities, definitely. You have to work with them to start where they are and show, as Lisanne said, the diseases that people are exposed to, and move back and say, ask the people, what are they eating? Why are they eating that? How are they preparing that food? and try and move to traditional food, because this happens because people have they've changed from traditional food, which was rich in fruits and vegetables. And now, even if they eat fruits and vegetables, the way the food is prepared, it makes it unhealthy at times. So you have to work step by step with people, showing them the advantages of eating healthy food. And you know, you don't have to be prescriptive. You have to work with them and say, for this is what is happening. This is what you are getting from what you are eating. These are the diseases that you are going to be exposed to, and try and substitute that for the healthy food. It's just a step by step that you need to take people to that. And the problem is that, you know, health and poor people, they say they've got few food choices, really, because there's no variety. They eat what is available. They use the little money they have to buy the food that is going to make them full, even if it's unhealthy. They don't worry much about healthy food, fruits and vegetables. As long as I get pap and I've got an unhealthy meat fat or a fat cook, that's going to fill me. So they are worried about what's going to fill them rather than what is going to make them healthy. So we need to work with communities and help each other and work together and produce a system that will be able to help other people. In the olden days, as I've said, no one went to bed hungry, because in the community, people know that in that household, these people are poor. Let's share. Whatever you have, they have the garden, when they take out from the garden, they share with each other. So we need to go back to the basic, go back to the olden days and work as communities. As you can see now, we've got this the Community Action Network, that are helping each other. The people are donating food. So I think the COVID, in a way, it brought something positive, that people are realizing that there are people who are needy. Let's donate, let's help each other, let's work together as a community.
Beatrice, are you finding the same? I mean, when I think about how if we separate this issue as a class issue and we say, well, poor people only have access to what food is readily available without transport, without much cash liquidity. People who have more, they've got transport and they've got cash availability. What I've understood is that what we're seeing is the further away that you eat from the earth, the more quickly those hormones are turned on. So younger and younger people of upper and middle class status are having their periods begin earlier because they're eating more ultra processed fast foods, chemically enhanced foods, and they're getting an artificial sense of nutritional density versus what traditionally poorer people eat, which is closer to the earth. Are you not finding that to be the case also in fact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, I think one of the reasons why girls are getting their periods earlier is because our animal products are laced with hormones and antibiotics. In South Africa, more than 50% of antibiotics are produced to give to animals. And that's because animals are fed the wrong food. They're being given grains. Cows are not supposed to be eating grains. They're supposed to be eating grass. And that's one of the reasons why animal food, meat has actually been given a bad name. It's not because meat is actually bad for you. If we were still doing what we used to going hunter-gathering and eating animals that had been running across many ecosystems and eating across many ecosystems, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that animal food. It's the way it's been fed and it's the way it's been processed. And and humans are the same, because we are eating these nutritionally negative foods such as pap and sugar and bread and pasta and pizza. There's no nutrition in that. You eat that, it actually costs you more in nutrition and energy to digest that food, to move it through the digestive system, to digest it, absorb it, and take it to where it needs to be used, than you're giving it. And so you put your body into a stress situation. And I think that people think, and this is I agree with Thandi about the healthcare workers. I think healthcare workers hold a huge responsibility. And unfortunately, a lot of healthcare workers are not educated in nutrition. They do not understand what nutrition is. Doctors do 6 weeks of nutrition in a medical degree, and it's not even compulsory. I don't know, it might be now, but it certainly wasn't up until a few years ago. There are still many, many medical doctors out there who say whatever you're doing has got nothing to do with the way you eat. And that is outrageous as far as I'm concerned. So I mean, I think people feel like their stomachs are full eating a bowl of pap, but actually they're constantly hungry. If you've eaten, I know that my breakfast is the breakfast of somebody who has access to a huge diversity of food, and I grow a lot of it myself as well. So I'm at an unfair advantage, no doubt about it. But if I were to eat, if people I know who even have that access to the diversity they have, if they're eating pap and bread and pasta and pizza and all those things which have very little nutrition, if any, they're always hungry. Their cells are starving. There's no nutrition there. And so the more nutritionally dense and various is your diet, the less hungry you are. And that's, I think, something that just doesn't get across. Because people think that, they just get the cheapest food, but if they got something slightly more expensive, they would need much less of it. And I again agree also with Thandi that people need to grow just a little bit of something at home. I mean, there are people out there who are growing vegetables on a piece of ground the size of a door. Enough to sustain themselves, and with a little bit left over. It's just that we're not teaching people to go back to the land and to just start to grow 1 or 2 little things, and to forage, to understand that the food that grows in that open field over there is edible.
Beatrice, I think that you've brought up a really very topical point, and it's inspired a couple of questions in the chat. And that sort of looks at, again, in terms of answering my question about who's responsible for it. There is a position that says that actually the consumer, the individual who's eating, must be responsible for their own nutritional uptake. And then there are others who say actually the structures, the governmental structures, the community workers, the WHO, the CDC, those who could have hopefully prevented us from being exposed to this global pandemic that has put all these stressors on our ability to feed ourselves, should be responsible. But then the question comes, and this is through the chat, how does a person who has not got a lot of money, who does not have transport, who is at the victimized end of this pandemic, how do they afford olive oil, avocados, grass-fed animal proteins? And how then does it become transferred to them that it's their responsibility to feed themselves in a healthy manner? They must grow their own food. And that's not directed at you, Beatrice, it's generically for the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I mean, I'm open to you know, whatever other people say, but I think, you know, if one eats, for example, at the moment, avocados are relatively inexpensive and relatively available. I mean, I think countrywide, there are certain areas, obviously, like in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal, where avocados are even more abundant, and certain fruits and vegetables are even more abundant. But I think that a lot of people don't even kind of understand, they don't know that those foods are better for them, and that they, in the long run, will fill them and make them feel much healthier in the long run. I think people just want to fill their tummies now, and that's a difficult one.
I think at the same time, the environment where people live does not make it easy for them, because things that are advertised on TV, you'll never see an advert of beans, dry beans, lentils. You'll see an advert of Coke, of Kentucky. So I'm sitting there, I'm watching TV. I wish I could get this. You go to the shop, you get the pamphlet which advertise unhealthy food. What do? You get a little bit of money. There are so many fast food shops around the areas where the poor live, and they also want to get it. The person who can afford, you see them on Friday or whenever they're driving, they go to Kentucky to buy. So that the little bit of money I earn on Friday, I also wish to buy and consume that. So the environment, we need to be dealing with the environment to say, don't sell these unhealthy food around the areas where people definitely will have access to them. And the advertisement. So why encouraging those people to make unhealthy choices? So the little bit of money I'll sacrifice and go and buy Kentucky instead of buying lentils or beans that can be shared by the family.
Yolanda, maybe if I could add to that, I think because I train dietitians and nutritionists, of course, we have the responsibility to then pass our knowledge on to our communities. We are a handful if we consider the doctors and the nurses numbers. So we also train the doctors, and Beatrice is very right. They don't get a lot of nutrition airtime. So that is problematic. Our numbers are low if we think about the dietitians and nutritionists, but we feel that responsibility, and we share and pass that responsibility on to our students to become the responsible citizens and part of the healthcare worker corps that will then pass their knowledge on to communities. And before I joined academia, I worked as a community dietitian on the west coast of Cape Town. And just a practical way of passing knowledge about affordable foods and locally available foods to community members is to take them shopping in small numbers. So I would go to the local areas, and not only the shops, but the fruit stalls that are available and vegetable stalls, and then make a list and then show how, if you buy or if you grow yourself, how much you can save money. And then also, if you make healthier choices, like Thandi has mentioned, the beans and lentils and so forth, how you can save money. And it is true, I mean, the cheap foods are the unhealthy foods. And I read a quote the other day that said, we should not be asking why is the food so expensive, the healthy foods. We should be asking, why is the unhealthy food so cheap? Why is that? What is in it? And I think it's just, the answer is right in front of us. It's because it's not real food anymore. So you think you're buying food, you're not buying food. You're buying remnants of food. But let's get back to the question that was posted in the chat. I mean, we really do realize that access to food, affordability of food, in times of crisis and in a time that we face at the moment, people are in dire need of assistance, not only education, because you can educate people until you are blue in the face and they have had enough of hearing your education. But if they don't have the means to buy and if they don't have access, then the education is not going to be able to change their behavior. So we need to acknowledge that there is a place for assistance, food assistance. There is a place where you could benefit from direct feeding. And I favor direct feeding sometimes above food parcels, because direct feeding, you can actually see who is receiving the food. Because we know in our households, you have unbalanced distribution of food sometimes, where the children and the women may eat last and the men would eat first. And the vulnerable groups, the children and the mothers, don't get what they should get. So if you send a food parcel home, you don't know if the children who really need the food, if they are benefiting. So I think there's a place for direct feeding, like our soup kitchens that our NGOs has been brilliant with during COVID. And then, of course, food parcels that could also support the immediate need that we face at the moment. We've been trying to assist NGOs to pack the most nutritious foods available into those food parcels, that they don't load it with starch and sugar only, but that they add the beans, that they add other pulses, lentils, etc., and other animal source foods like fish, tinned fish, and eggs, so that there is more of that in the parcel than just the starch that people so often want to put in those parcels. And then, of course, there are other direct feeding sites that have been affected, like schools and ECDs, your early childhood development centers. Those are also such excellent places and spaces where children and adults can access food. And especially children are the group that I'm most worried about in this case and in this pandemic. But they've been affected with lockdown. So the schools have now reopened, and you know about the court case where the government has now been forced to reopen the school feeding program, which is what we should be doing. So direct feeding is at the moment one of the things that we should consider, and not just education. But with that should also then be imparting of skills. And one of my colleagues runs an NGO in the northern suburbs of Cape Town. And with the food parcels that they've been packing and distributing with the help of our students, they have also taught the community members to plant their own vegetables. And they've supplied some of the tools and seeds and seedlings, and they are following up on that, so that they don't just leave destitute people and just say, just go on and you must now produce a food garden. They actually go back and support and follow up and see how they can support further. So there's a combination of interventions that we should consider. Education will also always be one of them, but it's not the only one that we can just leave people with knowledge. And then just to come back to your question about whose responsibility is it, apart from healthcare workers, dietitians, nutritionists, and the broader healthcare worker corps. There's also a saying that says nutrition is everybody's business, but nobody's responsibility. So it's very easy for people to speak about nutrition because everybody eats every day, but not everybody is knowledgeable, and we have to accept that. And I want to make a plea to the audience that they should contact knowledgeable people about nutrition, and not just anybody who eats every day and then just wants to say something about nutrition. It's a complex field, and we have to acknowledge that. So get your information from the right spaces and places and people, and then also take responsibility for your own health and your neighbor's health. We need to stand together and we need to support each other.
I like what you've said there, Lisanne, because I was thinking to introduce the concept next by way of asking you, what is the whole society approach that you're suggesting? But basically what I've heard you say encompasses all of that. It's the role of the educator, the role of the governmental systemic structure, the role of the partnering within the household, the role of the mother, the role of the individual in society as well, being in touch between the earth and oneself. But then, so to move on beyond that, also in our chat, there's a conversation that's arising that is looking at this concern between myself as an individual, what I understand to be healthy for me, and I eat and I feel fine. And there's a global pandemic going on around me. So I'm full of anxiety and I'm full of depression and I'm full of easy trigger anger, sadness, emotional upset. I don't necessarily correlate that that's a hormonal response pattern on the basis of the fact that, as Thandi said, as long as I have pop, I feel good, I'm okay, I'm surviving, I feel full. But meanwhile, I've got skyrocketing sugar, blood glucose levels, and you can't tell me I'm unhealthy, I'm doing the right thing. So there's a question that comes up in terms of, because of the knowledge base, the second brain, so to speak, that's in our gut, how are we to interact with that on a communal basis, on an NGO basis, on a scheme of feeding directly basis, to make sure that we understand, okay, yes, I'm anxious because there's a global pandemic, but also I'd need to see a specialist because my hormones are off balance. Again, that's open to any of you. More a point of discussion. Thandi, what do you feel about that? Is that, have you seen that again? Because you're engaging with young women that are in their teens sitting in class.
I think there are many things that leads people to eat. Like we are saying, I'm depressed, I need to eat this. You feel like you are greedy, you have an urge to eat that. It just goes back to the basics. If you know, you can eat something that's unhealthy for a day or a chocolate. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you have the limit. You understand? It's not a daily thing. It doesn't mean that if you eat healthy, you don't eat a little bit of unhealthy. So it's the basic knowing what is a balanced diet consisting of. The portion size is also, I must say, it says a lot how much do you eat, because it affects your body weight. And it's usually diet and physical activity. You have to include physical activity because it also helps to sort of lower your appetite as long as and you are using that energy as well. So those things must be, must go together. That's what I can say.
I agree with Thandi that physical activity is important, but I think then there's also the sort of, unfortunately, what a lot of people are doing is overactivity, undernourishing and overactivity, which is a huge, huge problem. People are, I come across people who are spending whatever, something like comrades marathon runners or, those kind of athletes and things running with no nutrition. They're eating starch. So they put their bodies in stress. And those are the people that actually drop dead at the end of the Comrades Marathon or the Argos or whatever those things are. And everybody says it's the same with even sport, young children on the sports field, on the rugby field. And those kids people say, oh, they're so healthy because they're doing so much exercise. But actually, they put their bodies into more stress because they're doing way too much. Their exercise outweighs their nutrition. And that's a real problem, I think. People, a lot of, and I just want to go back to also to what Lisanne said about the food parcels. In my area, which is Rondebosch, it's not the upper Rondebosch, but nevertheless it's Rondebosch. The food parcels, they're on my WhatsApp group, these people are posting these pictures of the food parcels that they're sending to, and so proud of the food they're putting into those parcels. And I just want to cringe, because it's just bread and pap and absolute rubbish. There's a few cans of fish, and I mean, I'm sure there are some food people who are collecting food that's quality, but certainly in this area, I mean, I go and put some fish and some beans and lentils and things into those things, but I'm a lone person amongst educated people in my area.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, Beatrice, I think the type of food that people put, it's a reflection of how we think about the poor people at times. That's how I think. Because they don't have a choice, this is what they're going to eat, which is wrong. That's how we regard them. And even the shops, even the supermarket, they will take and dump things that they won't sell in supermarkets that people of upper or middle class are buying. They will dump them in Kaisha, they dump them in the township, because they know that the poor people are going to be buying those things, even the unhealthy food.
All that unhealthy food is addictive. Sugar is completely addictive. I mean, and all those things, bread and pap and everything, basically once it hits the bloodstream, it's sugar. And so it's just and it hits all the neurotransmitters that can basically make you sort of feel good, and you think, in the short term, this is good for me. But it is not good for you, and you just want more and more and more of it. And that's why, you know, I mean, I agree with you, Thandi, that you know, the occasional chocolate and that it's fine, but the problem is that it's so difficult for so many people to have the occasional chocolate. You know, once they get going on it, and you know, I've been involved in nutrition for 20 years, and I mean, I know that if I start on chocolate, I mean, unless I've limited myself to that, I can finish a whole bar without any problem at all.
So I think that takes us definitely into the direction of addiction, and sugar is agreeably addictive. I don't know who could argue against that. I'd like to take another look again at this consideration around how food and the food system that we find ourselves engaging with, depending on how much cash flexibility, transport, wealth, influence within our own communities and retail outlets and informal trade environments we actually have access to. And looking at that as a bit of a easily recognized global tool of oppression. Again, this has come up in our chat, that it's by design, as Thandi just said, that these foods are dumped in these food deserts. They are those that have been bought in excessive quantities. I mean, I've been surprised at times going into a quote unquote big box store at the very beginning of this lockdown period and seeing all of the most unhealthy extra processed grain at the front, at the end caps of every shopping aisle, at the largest volume, 5 kilograms of pop, you know, at the most inexpensive price point. So for me, this makes me question, and it's something that I explore often within my conversations on my podcast, which is this discussion around re-examining ancestral foods. You know, there's nothing, I used to have a massive prejudice against maize, mealies, pop, massive, because I saw it as only something that was constructed to be of harm, sold and dumped to be of harm. But in actual fact, there is an ancestral connection to these foods that have been migrated around the planet that have, in their greatest diversity, the most nutritional density. I mean, a corn plant offers an enormous amount for the soil and for my body. However, here we are today. And so I think in terms of this whole societal approach, we need to kind of consider who's deciding what foods are actually brought into the country, placed in the shops, placed at the end caps, which farmers are actually making these fruits and vegetables available for informal trade that then get sold into those channels versus others. And it's relevant. It's relevant right now because we are looking at trying to maintain health and wellness across the country, not just in select environments and communities. What do you feed back around those ideas?
Yeah, that's a big topic. Who is responsible for that? But can I just go onto that corn thing that you were talking about and your prejudice against it? And I mean, I think first of all, when corn comes mainly from South and Central America, and there they process it in a very different way from how we process it. It's fermented, it's mixed with slate lime, and it makes it much more digestible and much more available. Secondly, the corn used to come in hundreds of different varieties of corn. I mean, if you look at, for example, potatoes in Peru and in Panama, just Google potatoes, Panama or Peru, and you'll see a mass of different yellow, pink, purple, red, blue, green potatoes. So, and the same goes with corn. That's how it was. Then there's also the seed issue and the genetically modified issue around corn. With pretty much all corn in this country is genetically modified. If it's genetically modified, it is genetically modified specifically so that they can spray as much glyphosate on it as they possibly can, and the plant won't be damaged by it. But that doesn't mean that the humans who eat that are not going to be damaged by it. And because we do not process our corn in the same way, we have a huge, high incidence of esophageal cancer in this country because of that unavailability of an incorrect ratio of amino acids in corn that makes people vulnerable to the esophageal cancer. So it's yes, I mean, and then of course it's totally processed and it's just all the nutrients are taken out of it basically. And as Lisanne says, it's the remnants of the corn that you actually have in the end. So yeah, I can't answer the question about who's responsible and, I mean, I suppose Pick n Pay and Checkers and ShopRite and those guys are responsible on a certain level because they know what they're doing.
Yolanda, I think this is such a very, very important topic that we're touching on now. The whole food systems issue and the players in the food system. And I think what is incredibly important to realize is that food is a very highly politicized commodity. So if we think about the different paradigms that nutrition has gone through and food systems have gone through, I think we could possibly have said that we worked on the main players, the corporates and big foods worked on supply and demand issues a long time ago. But I think we have surpassed that era. I think we are pretty much marketed and advertised into buying what is provided to us now. The supermarkets will still tell you people want XYZ, that's why we supply XYZ, but it's much more complex than that. If you go into, and I'm not a food systems expert, but I do work with people who are very knowledgeable on this specific topic. And if you go and dissect the food system and the players in the food system, you would see that there are actually not that many who control the ultra-processed market worldwide. There are about 10 companies that control that whole market. And they are not only working on demand from the public anymore. They dictate. So they bring onto the market what they want to sell, and that is flooding our supermarkets. So yes, our supermarket chains are responsible, and they are they're also in need of education from whoever is responsible for doing that. And I point at myself because I feel that I'm responsible and that I should do my part in educating whoever is willing to listen, I guess. So it's not just a flatline topic that we're touching on now. It's politicized. There's a lot of money involved. We're talking multi-billion-dollar industry here, the food market. And where the money is involved, where politics are involved, it gets messy and it gets sometimes ununderstandable what is happening in our own food space. And to take control of that is not as easy as just saying, I'm going to start planting my own vegetables and fruit, and I'm going to eat whole foods, and I'm going to just do the right thing. It is not as easy as that. And we need a lot of mindset change in consumers where they should be taking back the control and demanding what is healthy. Because that is the way that we are going to bring the price of healthy food down, is if we demand it. But at the moment, we're not demanding it. We're taking what we are given and we pay our money for that. Hard-earned money. We are paying food that is not nutritious. So this conversation can go on for a very long time. And I did see some of the questions that came up around what are the responsibilities around the food chain and the big corporates. Of course, they have a big responsibility. Some of them are buying into it, but I think there's still too much money and politics involved. And it should be more about the health of the population, the health of our nation, and not about the profits only.
I find that also quite, it raises a lot of emotion for me when thinking about as you said, this is not a flatline issue whatsoever. And I also find that it's interesting to consider when thinking of ultra-processed foods. There's another speaker in our series, which Zandile Makiza, she talked about the stages of food processing within the ultra-processed foods globalization project, I would say. And stage one being that is, it's a chicken. You caught the chicken running past, as Beatrice said. It's pretty much as close as it's going to get to its original state, except it's dead. Now we eat it, yeah? Then you have the stage two, which is making the food palatable, which of course would add your natural food colorants and some flavorants and, a little bit of processing. You have dried fruit, for example, right? With a little bit of sulfur added. The next, it becomes this making the food complex for global transportation and storage. And so if I were to answer my own question, I would say that's where the responsibility lies. It's in our easy uptake of this globalized notion of I need it out of season and from over there, and I need to put it up for this length of time over here, which we all saw everyone falling prey to, those of us who could afford to go into a supermarket and buy that 5-kilo bag of pop at the beginning of this lockdown that people are hoarding. We want to be able to hold and store and manage food. So yeah, no one's thinking, well, I could just ferment what I grew last summer. They're actually saying, I'm reliant on those 10 companies who have shipped it around the world for me, and now I can go and I can store it in my pantry. So a question then arises in the Q&A again, which is, where should we be looking? Where are the sources to get the information to educate ourselves about nutrition? And one that always comes to mind for me, Thandi, and this is specific to you, is that we have this idea that if I'm eating this and it's giving me energy, it's a good thing. What is this word energy? It's covering something. What is that?
Well, it's sources of food that we eat. The carbohydrate will give you energy. So if you eat that, will give you energy, definitely. Sugar will give you energy. But there are things that will give you energy for a long time. I mean, people who know, they will say, I need to have low GI food. you know, I'll take Coke and drink it. It will give me energy, but it will for a short time. Few minutes later, I need another one. You see, sugar is the same thing. It will give me instant energy, but later on, I'll need more and more. So what the result of that is that you overconsume and you end up with overweight and obesity, which is not good. So that's a problem. Yeah.
So then we shouldn't really be trusting the back panels of these food products, is it? Because I know if I look at something and it tells me, yes, I want some crisps and I want some chocolate covered peanuts and then I want, you know, a dried fruit. If I look at those 3 packets, I've got a lot of energy there in my hand, but it's also going to raise my glucose levels. It's also going to disrupt my endocrine system. Should I not be trusting that information?
Well, I think, you know, that unfortunately those energy things, they might be giving you energy, but you don't only need glucose for energy. And obviously there's also the keto story, which we won't go into. But because energy requires vitamin Bs, iron, vitamin D, magnesium, a whole variety of nutrients. So if you just take looking at the energy, then you're actually, I mean, to make that energy, you're actually depleting yourself of resources. So it's, I mean, I think we've got to get away from this energy stuff, actually. We've got to look at, and as Thandi says, the long term, what keeps us going in the long term. We've all got sort of, in a way, we've all got too much energy. Although, I mean, obviously there's those people who have been taking all that food with energy for a long time. They've got chronic fatigue and whatever. And because of our nutrient negative food, we have low energy, etc. But we are actually putting too much energy foods into our diet. That needs to go out the window. Yeah. And I mean, dried fruits are better than a lot of other things, but rather eat the raw fruit. the undried fruit, because the dried fruit is very high in sugar, and then I'm just diverting slightly here because there's also all the food dumping that's going on. You know, all the bananas and vegetables which are produced in abundance, and then because they can't sell them for sufficient price, they get dumped into the ocean and things, and that's a huge other topic, which, I mean, is terrifying because that's a lot of nutrient-dense food is getting dumped while we are sitting with rubbish food. No, food that's not rubbish, as Lisanne said. I mean, that's not food. Food that's not food.
I think also just to add to that, where do we go if we need information about nutrition and food? So obviously I would like to mention the Association for Dietetics in South Africa. If people want to or have access to the internet, they could go onto that website, and also the Nutrition Society of South Africa. But then also, I think we have myself and Thandi representing universities, and we call ourselves your knowledge partners. So I do believe that we have a responsibility to share our knowledge with the public. I try and do that by writing for magazines and for the media on a regular basis, and then also speaking on radio, etc. That we try and get what we call evidence-based information out to the public. So research that has been done that we can then back up with different research studies to say this is the best evidence that we have at the moment. And then also just, I think to say there is worth in the reading a label that you find on packages that does supply you with information, but you still need to know what it means. You need to be able to understand what that is telling you. And of course, you don't only need, as Beatrice and Thandi, excuse me, has said, you don't only need energy, but you need other vitamins and minerals with that to complete the nutritional requirements. And what we find in our foods, in our food system, is an absolute abundance of energy-rich foods but nutrient poor. So they contribute to your energy, to your fuel that the body needs, but it doesn't give you your essential vitamins and minerals, and it also doesn't give you good fats and good carbohydrates that come from unrefined sources, and then also good protein. So those are the things that you need to explain to someone so that they can make choices based on what is actually on the labels. And that's not that easy to do. But once you understand it, then it gets interesting. Then it's fun to actually compare different products with one another. And it's also something fun, I think, for teenagers to do. They are inquisitive. I think if we can teach them how to spot a good food versus a not so good food, then they could use that even in school as projects that they can share with the children to make learning fun and to make food also more fun and spunky. I think that is what is also required. Food should not be just a monotonous topic, and it should be inspiring, and it should be interesting. And we are often guilty of not making nutrition as sexy as it could be, but there are movements in that area also to make food your friend and make food interesting again. There are movements around that and catchy phrases, so to inspire people to engage with their food and to fall in love with their food all over again.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable. I've come across a kind of a sexy food lab there at Wits University. They've got a sexiness growing alongside their food lab so that it appeals particularly to youth. I want to shift just a little bit and tell you something else that came up for me as a theme when looking at your speaking videos there on our website and the YouTube channel. What I saw is that when we don't get the best optimal diverse nutritional uptake, when we find our diets are rich with ultra processed foods and intensity levels of sugar, obviously you get, as Thandi said, the obesity. You also, of course, get diabetes, and you also get a prevalence or a predilection for cancer-related illnesses or illnesses relating to cancer, and then, of course, stroke. And what really stood out to me is in looking at the consideration around how much pop we eat, which is ultra refined, which is, fine, it's whatever it needs to be to fulfill the feeding, but the sugar that gets ingested creates this precursor for stroke and diabetes. And what we've been seeing is that there's an increasing incidence in sub-Saharan Africa, in particular with youth. So this is, 15 to 45-year-old people who are suffering fatalities from stroke as well as ongoing life problems because of recovering from stroke. Where are you both seeing that in terms of this kind of idea, looking at decolonizing foods, that we could reclaim indigenous grain that gives us the food source, the fuel source that we need, less sugar, more sense of a reconnection to who we are and where we come from and what we're eating underfoot to help mitigate against some of these comorbidities that people then are finding themselves falling prey to COVID-19.
Yolanda, can I jump in and step before you get the corn and the sugar and all of that? I believe with my whole heart, if we correct our infant and young child nutrition, we will go a long way to preventing the specific diseases that you mentioned, stroke, cancer, diabetes, obesity. If we can support mothers to breastfeed right from the beginning, if they deliver their babies and they initiate breastfeeding immediately after birth, and they are supported and motivated, and if they are protected to provide the infants with their own milk, mother's own milk, for the first 6 months of life, and then start with solids but continue breastfeeding for up to 2 years of age and beyond. We know that in that first 1,000-day space that I spoke about in my presentation, that is where we can make the biggest impact in nutrition. Not only nutrition, but in global health. So if we can get that space to be protected, promoted, and supported, then we have already won a huge part of the battle that we are fighting today with all of these different diseases that we have in our midst. And I often say that people don't look for the problem from pregnancy and infancy. They think it's something that happened in the past 5 years. When they are 55, they think, oh, I've been eating too many chops or pap or whatever. It's not that last 5 years that has been the problem. The problem starts early on. And if we don't turn the ship on the first 1,000 days of life, we are going to lose this battle big time. And now we have to deal with a pandemic in addition to our everyday, the normal that we spoke about, that was already flawed. So my stance on this is that we need to start early. We need to start absolutely investing in that first 1,000 days of life, and breastfeeding and appropriate, safe, complementary feeding very early on, and try to get the space of the first 1,000 days right, because that will, in my mind, turn the ship, turn the tide on this whole issue of malnutrition, and put us on the right trajectory so that we can then follow on with all the different other interventions. But if we're not going to correct the first 1,000 days of life, we are going to battle to get it right later in life.
Oh, in addition to what Lisanne is saying, I think we need to change the mindset of people. There are foods that are associated with status. It's status to eat that food and not that food, especially the traditional food. People won't eat it, won't grow it because it's easy, it's associated with, especially amongst the poor, it's associated with status to go to the supermarket and buy this type of food. So the mindset of people. And also, just to have a conversation with communities so that they demand the healthy food, so that the environment, because the environment, it contributes a lot. So if they increase in knowledge, have a conversation with them so that they will demand healthy food to be sold in their environment. That might influence, it's part of advocacy to influence policy so that they deal with that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Again, also on those first 1,000 days, and that, but that's the tricky part, because actually you're getting children, you're getting people before they're going to school, and then it's you have to. It's the mothers that need to be educated then about how to, and also how, breastfeeding, absolutely, completely with you on that one, with all of you on that one, and then how to introduce the first foods, because we seem to have this idea that the first foods need to be mushed up, whatever, baby foods, pumpkin, all the first foods that are given to children are like pumpkin, peach, apples, pears, it's all like these sweet, starchy foods. So they get accustomed to eating that sweet kind of food. Whereas if you give them real food, like, like a bit of carrot in a stick that they can hold in their hands and chew on, that's actually what babies should be eating. They shouldn't be getting this mushed up food. I mean, and not to mention all those baby cereals, which nobody should be eating. Not a human being on this earth should be eating the cereals that are so-called baby cereals, or any cereals for that matter out there. I mean, I remember being interviewed on Women's Own about 10 years ago, and the interviewer asked me, what do you do? What baby porridge do you choose? I said, you don't. you just leave those all out. She said, that's revolutionary. You know, and I sort of feel like maybe it's still revolutionary to say that no baby should be eating those grain porridges. First of all, we do not, I mean, grains are very hard on the digestive system. They turn to sugar as soon as they hit the bloodstream. We used to ferment all our grains before we ate them. When we first started, or a few hundred years ago, when we first started to eat grains, we soaked them, we sprouted them, we fermented them to make them more available, their nutrients more available, and to make them more nutritionally dense. Now we don't do that, and certainly if you're buying things like parboiled rice, which there's no way that the big manufacturers are going to ferment or prepare in any way or activate those grains. So I mean, I just think that the baby food industry is a big one. And I had somebody working for me whose daughter gave her baby sweet yogurt. She had been brainwashed from TV that yogurt was good for her baby. So instead of breastfeeding, she gave her baby sweetened yogurt. That's all that baby got for the first 3 to 6 months of its life.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. I know that we're coming to a close, and I want to just pick up and thread the conversation from its beginning and leave you with one question. It seems to me that we've kind of agreed that the education is needing to take a whole society approach, and that definitely looking at from the beginning, the optimal health of the gut biome through to the gestational infant and the breastfeeding and the adolescent who needs to be educated and participating in the food choice making, the young adult and the household, no matter what the amount of food available or money available, still the choices really should go first and foremost to the child and the female in the household. And then toward a decolonizing of this globalized food, which we've seen often is far too ultra processed, should be able to hopefully bring us back, once we've collected all this education and information, to an indigeneity in our eating, which goes back to what you had said earlier, Beatrice, about grazing and foraging. For example, my favorites are sorghum and millet and amaranth. These are ancient African grains that are very good for us. They are nutritionally dense. They have proteins, the available amino acids that we need. They're readily available and they're inexpensive. So if we kind of, again, take a lens of decolonizing what we have readily available to us and welcome that back into our dietary diversity, I think we'll be doing amazingly wonderful things to boost our immune systems. Can any of you give a last thought or note in offering from your lens of perspective on this issue?
Yeah, I agree with you on those grains. I mean, but again, they need to be prepared in the same way, fermented, activated, because in their very nature, grains, legumes, whatever, all those are seeds. What they really want to do is to reproduce and become a plant. So they contain what we call anti-nutrients, which bind to other nutrients and stop us being able to absorb them. So I know this can open up a whole other area, but grains, legumes, nuts, seeds are all seeds. They do not want to be consumed by us, and that's why they restrict that. So sprouting, fermenting, activating, and preparing them in the ways that we did hundreds of years ago. And on the microbiome, I just want to say that the diversity of the microbiome is absolutely critical. And the diversity of our microbiome is what supports our immune system. 90% of our immune system is in the gastrointestinal tract, supported by that microbiome. And if we do not eat a diverse diet, we do not have a diverse microbiome. And that is absolutely critical. So, yeah. I hope that answers your question.
Yolanda, for me, the best way of decolonizing our food system starts with breastfeeding. I think that's a given. And it's a joy for me to lecture on infant and young child nutrition, because it's that is the part of the curriculum that was the easiest to decolonize, because it wasn't colonized to start off with, at least in our institution. And also, if you speak about early foods, I think that is where we can embrace what we have in our own country, the indigenous foods. We have amazing greens in our country, and we need those green leafy vegetables specifically for the nutritious properties. And just going from there, I think if we can empower our mothers to believe in themselves and their own abilities to feed and nurture their children, that will take us a long way. And that means that we need to support our mothers in all places and spaces, including in the workplace, because more mothers are entering the workplace. And that is where we get the most antagonism, I think, still, that mothers are not supported in the workplace and in public spaces. So we can go a long way to just do those things and get that right, support maternity leave, etc., so that mothers can believe in themselves and that they can believe they can actually provide the best nutrition to their babies available on earth. And they don't have to compete with any package. They are the best, and they need to know that. I think that if we can do that, we will make big strides already. But then also, I think what we need to do is educate ourselves about the food system, educate ourselves about what is in our food, not just accept what we are told. Because people would question breast milk often and say, but what is in breast milk? But they will not question a package on a shelf. They will trust that that package is safe and that it is nutritious. But they will often point to a mother and say, but your breast milk is no good. So that is the kind of empowerment that we need, that we should support specifically our mothers, our females, our caregivers, but then also, of course, educate our partners and fathers so that they can support our mothers. And that's on an individual level. But if we take that further, again, coming to the whole of society approach, as a society, we need to really think about what we are doing to our children and what we are doing to our mothers and fathers. And we must ask ourselves what we are leaving to the next generation. What is the legacy in food we are leaving for the next generation? And I take that on myself too, with 2 teenage boys, teaching them the right thing, teaching them early on about breastfeeding. People frown upon it if you teach young males about breastfeeding. I believe that is what we need to do, so that they can one day support their partners or their friends to do the right thing. And that has a ripple effect right through. If you educate the young people and then also support them, you can't just educate and leave them. You need to do it continuously, and you need to support that with good motivation and good debate. They don't, and they shouldn't just accept what we are saying. We should be able to debate that with them.
Agreed.
And then, of course, we can't leave our government out of this. They also need to support the right thing.
Thandi, can you take us home with what your final thoughts are?
Yes, we need to work with the communities. We need to encourage them to go back to the traditional food, the grains, the greens, and they need to know that the benefit of eating those foods rather than the bought food, which is unhealthy.
Excellent summation, all 3 of you. Thank you so much for sharing this conversation with me. And for everyone who's been watching and listening, I'm sure you know, but please continue to discuss this series with those who also like to eat and eat healthily. The videos are going to remain on the website and on the YouTube channel for quite some time, so you'll have access to them if you can't listen and watch in real time. So thank you so much to the sponsors again and for joining us. It's been fantastic chatting with you ladies. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you to Yolanda Busbee Methvin for moderating the session, Professor Thandi Puoane, Beatrice Rabkin, and Professor Lisanne Plessis. Thanks to all of you in attendance today for your questions, comments as part of the dialogue. I would like to formally acknowledge and thank our sponsors, the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security and the DG Murray Trust, and our partners, the African Center for Cities, Maribi Village, the City of Cape Town, Ickley, and Derrick. I also want to say that given the kind of closing direction of the conversation, some of this will be picked up in tomorrow's session, thinking about decolonizing food and other aspects related to the dialogue around culture and so on, where the theme will be food and culture, moderated by journalist Ishego Vender. So I encourage all of you to join us again tomorrow afternoon if you have the opportunity. And as Yolanda said, if you don't have the chance, you can see the replay video, which will be archived on the Food Dialogues website and on YouTube. So with that, I'm Kurt Ackerman with the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust, thanking you and wishing you a good evening.